Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for what is the first installment of our policy and advocacy training series. We're putting this on with quite a few other organizations. A few housekeeping things. If you could please try to keep yourself on mute unless you're asking a question. And then when you are asking a question, if you could please try to chime in chat first. We will be monitoring those questions and asking them as they come. So we want this to be as much of a discussion as possible. I know we're in a meeting setting and not a webinar, and that was intentional, so we can foster more of that discussion. So if you have questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat and we'll take them as they come. But if for some reason we miss you, do feel free to chime in. That's totally fine. Right. I'm going to start sharing screen. Okay, can everybody see the slides? Copy that? Wonderful. Okie doke. Like I said, good morning, everybody. My name is Amanda Fernandes. I'm the Policy and Advocacy Director with Hawaii Public Health Institute. And we are working with a small hui of other organizations to bring you this training. I will have more information about the other organizations involved and also future trainings at the end of the presentation. So this session is about getting involved in the 2022 legislative process in, specifically around states, counties, boards, and commissions. And we are lucky enough to have Sandy Ma here today from Common Cause Hawaii, who knows a lot about the redistricting that you might have heard of is, and what's going on in 2022 and why it's such a big election year for Hawaii. Sandy, did you want to introduce yourself?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. It's a cold Saturday morning in Hawaii, so we appreciate you spending 2 hours with us this morning. I'm Sandy, and I'm with Common Cause Hawaii, and I'm happy to have this opportunity to talk with you about advocacy and policy, and so glad there's so many people interested in this. So feel free to ask any questions. I'll be monitoring the chat while Mandy is talking, and raise your hand with the raise your hand reaction button on the bottom of the Zoom, or if it's however your Zoom is configured on your screen. And we want this to be an interactive process. So we look forward to a robust discussion and to answer any questions you may have. Take it away.
Thank you. So just briefly to go over our agenda this morning, we're going to start with a broad discussion of what counts as policy and advocacy and why advocate. And then talk more about the state level advocacy. That's where the bulk of the first half of this is going to be spent. And we're going to talk a lot about legislative process. And then we're going to talk a little bit about county level advocacy as well, specifically with before county councils. And then talking about advocating for boards and commissions and the laws that you need to be aware of. And then finally, we're going to close it out with a discussion of the 2022 reapportionment. So Sandy's we're first gonna introduce our organizations, a little bit more about those. I'll kick it back over to Sandy real quick.
Thank you. So I'm with Common Cause. We are a national organization with a DC office and chapters in 35 states. We focus on making sure that people have access to their government and the government is accountable to the people. Next slide, please. So we are a nonpartisan grassroots organization, and we want to make sure that our government is a representative democracy. So we work on making sure that our government is open, honest, and accountable to the public interest, and we promote equal rights, equal opportunity, and representation for all. So we want to make sure that our people, the public, know how to interact with government, know how to reach our government representatives, and make sure that we know how to advocate for our interests. No matter what your interests are, no matter where your interests lay, we want to make sure that our government is responsive to the public that they are elected to serve. Next slide, please. So our program areas are voting and elections. Make sure that our voting systems are fair and our elections are modern. We work on redistricting and gerrymandering so that we can make sure that we elect officials that represent us, that look like us. We work on ethics and accountability to make sure that our elected officials are ethical and are accountable to the people. We want to make sure that our media is not so consolidated that we only hear one voice out of the media. Democracy depends on a fair and independent media. We also work on money and influence. There's a lot of money in our political system, which kind of skews our elections. So we work on trying to have public financing of elections. So those are our major program areas. Thank you, Amanda.
Great, thanks, Sandy. So a bit about Hawaii Public Health Institute. We are a local 501c3 nonprofit organization that works in many different areas of public health. And a lot of what we do is advocacy, but we also, we work with a lot of community stakeholders in all different sectors. Our program areas can include things like school health, health promotion, disease prevention, environmental health, tobacco prevention and control, built environment and environmental justice, food safety, rural health, behavioral health, oral health, social determinants of health. We support a lot of initiatives that are more around economic justice, many things that you may already be aware of that you didn't really necessarily link to public health. Our mission is to advance health and wellness of the people and islands of Hawaii. And our vision is that all people of Hawaii achieve their best health. We improve policy systems and environments where people live, learn, work, age, and play through education, advocacy, research, capacity building, and training. Great. So now that we've learned a little bit about the organizations presenting here today, I'll talk a little bit, I want to do a brief introduction of what I mean when we're talking about policy. And a lot of these are answers to questions that I think people are very commonly afraid to ask, though you really shouldn't be afraid to ask them in this space. You definitely shouldn't be afraid of asking me dumb questions, because if you're asking it, I'm sure I've asked a much dumber question in the past. And so here are a few of the definitions of policy that I like. You're going to find a lot of different definitions of policy online. And so when people talk about policy, it can mean a lot of different things. It can mean policy that is created by government bodies. It could also mean internal policies to private entities like organizations or companies. And so policy, the word policy can be really broad. When we're talking about it today, we're really talking about it as it relates to governmental bodies and what the type of, and how they have statements of their intention and what they think the law should be or what they think common practice should be. And that's what we're really discussing when we talk about policy. Black's Law Dictionary defines it as the general principles by which a government is guided in its management of public affairs, or the legislature in its measures. That's pretty good. I actually like the CDC definition of policy better. As a law, regulation, procedure, administrative action, incentive, or voluntary practice of governments and other institutions. So I think that more accurately kind of encompasses a lot of what we might be talking about when we're discussing policy. I mean, but typically when we're talking about policy as it relates to advocating before, specifically the legislative branch, but also the executive agencies, we're going to be talking about asking them for a written statement that is binding and enforceable and broadly applicable to a certain geographic area, type of institution or physical space, and or a group of people. The policy can also encompass things that are like resolutions, and a statement of policy, an expression of policy. I would also include that in the definition of policy, and resolutions are not binding and enforceable. So this is typically what we're talking about, but this doesn't necessarily encompass everything. A few policy examples: local ordinances, state or federal laws, organizational or agency policy, contracts and agreements, zoning codes, and resolutions. So some of these are binding and enforceable, some of these are not. Like resolutions are not binding and enforceable, but most of these others are. And so not all policy will be law, but all law contains some kind of statement. It relates in some way to policy. Something that I think trips a lot of people up when they start out in advocacy. I know this seems like a very wonky slide, so bear with me, but it's kind of the hierarchy of laws. And so a lot of where people get messed up is not necessarily what the idea is, but who to take the idea to. In order to know who the best person to take the idea to, you have to know like who has the authority to pass the law or pass the policy that you're hoping to pass. And in order to know that, you have to know the hierarchy of laws. And the United States Constitution, that is the supreme law of the land. So that is going to bind every other governmental entity. So from the federal government down to the county, city or county council, they all have to be bound. They're all bound by the United States Constitution. And then next in the hierarchy, coming from the top, is acts of Congress and treaties. So this is at the federal level. And then state constitutions. So every state has a state version of a state constitution that in many ways mirrors the United States Constitution. And how it works is the US Constitution creates a floor, and you can build above the floor, but you can't go below the floor. So you can have a constitution that provides more protections for your people, but you can't have a constitution that provides fewer protections for your people and seek to enforce that. The U.S. Constitution is still going to reign supreme and is going to be binding over state constitutions. And then we have state laws and statutes. So this is the Hawaii revised statutes, and these are the laws that you typically think of at the state level. Then you have the city and county ordinances. So an ordinance is the local version, that's the local law. But between state laws and statutes and city and county ordinances, you actually have a thing called the county charter. And the charter is what is the local version of the Constitution. So that was a very quick overview of the hierarchy of laws. If anybody has any questions, please chime in. I know it sounds a little academic, but it's actually very easy, but it's something that people don't really touch on in these types of trainings that I think is actually really important to know, because I've seen advocates get in trouble because they're going to the wrong legislative body. They're going to their county council for something that they really don't have the authority to do. So who counts as a policymaker? When we're talking about policymakers, we often are talking about elected officials. So these are the ones that most people would think of. So we're talking about folks like, Representative Della Albalati or County Council Member Heather Kimball on Hawaiʻi County. But we're also talking about maybe appointed officials or, hired officials. Like former HPD police chief Susan Ballard was a policymaker. She set policy for HPD. And director of Hawaii Department of Health, Dr. Libby Char, also counts as a policymaker. They promulgate policy through administrative rules, but also setting policy under their purview for the department and the programs that the department oversees. a lot of people might be intimidated by the legislative process and the policymaking process, but you really needn't be. And it's important to get to know this process and familiarize yourself with it, because advocating for policy change, you can make a change in your immediate surrounding environment. You can make a change in your the institutions that you interact with most frequently, and you can impact a small group of people. But if you're advocating for policy change on a wider scale, you're going to reach more people. There's accountability and enforcement. You can have something that's binding, not just now, but for future generations. And we're institutionalizing good ideas. That not only helps, say you're passing a policy at city council in Honolulu County, city and county, but just by passing that policy, you might also set a new standard for other counties of Hawaii or even across the nation. And it all starts with an idea. So if you're here today, it's because you probably have really good and big ideas and you want to transform those into policy change, and that's awesome. How I like to think through my ideas is I like to think about, like, what's the problem I'm seeking to address? What is the root cause of that problem? Who does this problem affect? And how does your idea address the problem and its root causes? This is something that it sounds very basic, but another trap I see advocates fall into, and that we've all fallen into ourselves if we're in this work, is we think we start with the solution and then we're like, what does this fix? And actually, if passed, sometimes the most obvious solution isn't going to have that big of a practical effect. And often the most impactful changes in policymaking are not the sexiest. They're not the big sexy laws. They might be something that is that seems more like a housekeeping, measure that we're amending. It's a very technical amendment, but it could make all the difference. And so you really have to follow what is going to address not just the immediate problem, but the root cause of that problem. All right. One of the most important parts is determining who has the power to make your idea a reality. I don't know if you know who this is. This is obviously Ron Swanson of the Pawnee Parks Department. He has the power to make your idea a reality, but he probably won't. So now that we have like a brief introduction to what policy is, what we're talking about when we talk about policy making, I'm going to talk more about state level advocacy and the legislative process. So you could have the best idea in the world, but if you don't know the deadlines for the legislative calendar, your idea is never actually going to see the light of day, or it has a very low chance of survival unless you're working very closely with the legislator. So to set yourself up for success, it's good to have at least a basic understanding of the legislative process. And again, it seems very intimidating, but it's really not. It's sometimes it can be confusing, but generally it's very easy to learn, and there are a lot of resources. I didn't put a slide for this, but I do want to plug the public access room, which you can call at any time, and they're open during normal business hours at the Capitol, and they'll actually walk you through different parts of the legislative process. They're really helpful, even if you just want to know what's happening with a specific bill. But to give a brief overview, the general process in legislative bodies are you introduce a bill or you introduce a resolution, and then it gets referred to different subject matter committee. Oh, thanks, Sandy. Sandy just shared the public access room link in the chat. Then it needs to be heard, and it also by committee, and it needs to be voted on the floor. And then finally, there's an approval by the executive branch. So this is a bill's journey. And we're going to start with bill introduction. So bills are introduced by a House or a Senate member. There are 76 legislators in the Hawaii State Legislature. We have 25 state senators and 51 House members. And you're going to have one of them needs to introduce your bill. Citizens can't introduce it themselves. They have to have a legislator introduce it for them. Even the governor has the legislature introduce his package for him. So even the governor cannot just straight introduce a bill. It has to be introduced for you. So who introduces? House members, and if you see HB or SB before a bill, that first letter tells you where it originated. So if it's an HB, that means it's a House bill. It originated in the House. If it's an SB, it originated in the Senate. And you will see identical bills introduced called companion bills. This is often a good strategy to get your bill across the finish line because it gives it more vehicles and more chances for success. You can have a House member and a senator introduce identical language, and they will be linked together on the bill status page, and we refer to those as companion bills. All right, step one, introduction. Now that you have a great idea and you've worked with a legislator to introduce your great idea into a bill, and I do want to say that you don't have to be an expert at legislative drafting. You can even come up with a few bullet points and pitch it to a legislator. I would start with the one that that represents your district where you live. And I would go to them and be like, I have this great idea to help our community. And here are a few bullet points of what I think a bill needs to do. And they'll actually work with you and send it to a drafting agency. So you don't have to come with a full-fledged bill. You can, and they'll work with you then as well. But if don't get hung up by trying to come with this fully fleshed out idea, it's really great to just start early, talk to legislators early on about what you want to introduce, and they can help you drafting it in bill form, because it will need to go through that anyway. Sorry, Sandy.
Now actually is the time to meet with state legislators. If you have an idea for a bill, if you have a problem that you're trying to solve, and as Mandy was saying, know which area you're trying to solve. If it's at the county level, if it's at the state level, or if it's at the federal level, know who to approach to solve your problem. So if you're trying to approach a statewide problem, now is the time to approach the state legislators to try to get a bill introduced to solve a problem, because our state legislative session is coming up. It's opening up soon in January, on January 19th. So now is the time to approach a state legislator to get a bill introduced. Thank you, Amanda.
Dominic, I see your question in the chat. You said, do you need to live in the district who introduces the bill? So the district of the legislator who introduces the bill. And the answer to that is no, absolutely not. So you can approach legislators. I would start with your representative if you're newer, but if you already know the legislative process, or if you have a good relationship with another legislator, approach them. Often people will approach the committee chairs that would hear the bill in question, the bill that you want to see introduced. But that's a great question. No, you don't have to live in their district.
And sometimes you may not know who the committee chairs are. If you're new to the process, you may not know which committees your bill goes through. Sometimes I don't know which bills my bill goes through, my common cause bills. Usually I do, but sometimes I don't. And so I will go to a sympathetic legislator that I've worked with in the past. So just keep those ideas in mind. Great question.
So step two is committee hearings. The legislature is broken up into subject matter committees. So it could be the health committee or the consumer protection committee, and they'll oversee the bills. They have purview over certain subject matters, certain topics, and so it's going to go through there. So it'll get its referrals and like Sandy into the different committees after it's been introduced. So step two is to actually get a hearing in those committees so that it can meet all of its deadlines and pass out of those committees. This is where it's going to be amended. So these are where the vast majority of amendments take place. There are, of course, floor amendments, but The vast majority of amendments take place in the committee meetings, in the committee hearings. Committee hearings are public, and you can submit testimony and you can testify verbally as well. So they're assigned to at least one committee, but typically 2 or 3. And like I said, they deal with specific issues. Each committee has a chair and a vice chair, and the committee chairs decide which bills are placed on the hearing schedule. So committees will only meet on certain days of the week, and you can actually get that once legislative session starts. You can call public access room and get that schedule. So you'll know if you need a bill heard by a certain date, you need to look at what days of the week that committee that needs to hear it actually meets. And so you know it might be a much earlier date than what you think. It might be a few days before, right? And you should always think of, buffer. Oops. Oh no. You should always give yourself a little bit of buffer, because there may be internal deadlines that you're not aware of when it comes to when a bill needs to move out of committee. So you can always call, committees have clerks as well. And if you don't know who the clerk is, you can call the chair's office, or you can call public access room and find out when it needs to be heard. This is where, so in committee hearings is when a bill is amended and then voted on by the committee members. The chair will make a recommendation recommending it on passage for its next reading on the floor, or they could hold the bill or defer the bill, which means that they won't be passing along, so it won't be going to its vote. That usually means it's dead. And this is where, again, committees are where you would testify. So you don't testify when it goes for a full floor vote, but you would testify in committee. So after it passes all of its committees, it needs to go back to the floor and pass 3 readings, what are called readings. And essentially it's just the full legislature voting on the bill. And often this goes by very quickly, but this is when some legislators might stand up and deliver floor speeches about the bill. It has to do that, and it has to go through these readings in both chambers. So here's a little chart. So it'll start out, so if you have a House bill, it'll start out by going through the House committee, needs to go back to the floor for second reading, and then its next committee, and then back to floor referral to go to its final committee, then its final, and then its final committee, and then it'll get its third reading. And then what happens next is called crossover. So if you have a House bill, it crosses over to the Senate. That means it has passed through all of its House committees, 3 readings in the House, and then the House sends it over to the Senate, and we start this process all over again. So the bill will get its first reading in the Senate, then it goes to its Senate committees, and then goes to its final reading.
Mandy, we have a question in the chat from Olivia. Olivia wants to know what determines how many committees a bill needs to go through.
That is a great question, Olivia. Okay. So one thing that determines it, that should determine it, is how is the subject matter that it deals with. But also what determines it is whether the chairs of the committee, the subject matter committees, want to hear it. And another thing that will determine it is whether the powers that be want it to pass. Quite frankly, they will refer a bill to a lot of committees. I have seen a quadruple referral. If they don't want it, they want to make it harder to pass. Sandy, do you have anything to add on that?
Some bills have like joint referrals, joint committee referrals. Mm-hmm. So like joint referrals, meaning like it's judiciary and another committee have to hear it at the same time. And that also makes scheduling hard. because if 2 or 3 committees all have to get together and hear it at the same time, the committees have to have quorum. Each committee has to have quorum to hear the bill. And so if that happens, that's also very hard to schedule. And like Mandy said, it has to do with the powers that be in each chamber of the legislature, favoring a bill and wanting it to pass or making it more difficult to pass. So there are a lot of political considerations in scheduling a bill for committee hearings. And I've heard legislators say if they actually knew how bills are scheduled for committees, they are very rich people and could retire. So that's a very, very good question.
To add to that, if I had the choice between having like 3 consecutive, triple consecutive referrals, so that means 3 different hearings have to take place, and having two joint referrals. So where it technically has to go through 4 committees, but it's only 2 hearings, I would actually choose the 2 joint referrals. I don't know if you feel differently, Sandy, but I have had better luck getting, I have found it to be easier to get hearings for if you just need 2 hearings than if you need 3 separate hearings, and it makes your deadlines better as well.
You know, they're all rough. The more
it's all rough.
They're all rough. Yeah. Yeah, they're all rough.
Okay, so one thing that you can do though, and we'll talk about this, maybe we'll talk about this in one of the next ones is, but one strategy, if you are hitting hard up against a deadline, you can actually ask the 2nd committee or the 3rd committee to waive off. And what happens is that then they can just say, I actually don't need to hear this bill. They can let the primary committee, which is the 1st committee, know, and then, make sure that's okay with the powers that be. And then they might waive off, and that gives you a lot more breathing room for your deadlines. So that's another option. If you have a good, most legislators, I don't think are necessarily offended if you ask them if they would be willing to waive off. You just do so very gently. Say you want to give it the best chance possible, but they might not want to waive off. Quite frankly, they might really want to hear it, or it might just fall squarely in their purview and they feel like they should be on. Okay, conference committee, everybody's favorite topic. So conference committee technically is meant to be a time where we reconcile 2 different versions of the bill. And what that means is that you say you have a bill that passes through the House, say it starts in the House, passes through the House, and it looks like A. And then you take A and you pass it through the Senate, and the Senate changes it a little bit, so it looks like B. And so you take A and B in conference committee, and you try to figure out how to reconcile the differences between the 2 versions. I hope that makes sense. However, conference committee does not have public hearings like the regular subject matter committees typically do. And so conference committee, which is comprised of members from each chamber, it's typically the chairs or representatives from the subject matter committees that heard it in that chamber. And in the final 2 weeks of session, they meet in a public meeting, and they'll say what they're going to do with the bill, and they'll say, we're going to reconvene again in an hour. We're going to reconvene again in 2 days. So you really just have to tune in a bunch of times to find out what's going on with the bill. Even online, the status sheet for the bill, which we'll show you in the next portion, and one of the next portions of the presentation, it doesn't always show the most up-to-date information because it all happens so fast. Conference committee can be one of the most challenging parts of session because you don't always know what's going on. It happens, they call it a black box because it's typically behind closed doors conversations. You want to be in on those conversations. So you want to make sure that this is not the time to let up. This is the time to push harder. This is the time to be very public in your communications, getting support about your bill, getting people to call the committee members, the conference committee members, offices, and making sure that people know that the bill has a lot of support. Once the conference committee, well, actually, let me back up. conference can be avoided. And how it can be avoided is in two ways. So one way is if the Senate and the House both pass identical versions of the bill. So if House bill goes through the House, ends up as A, and then the Senate doesn't make any changes, that bill is still A. So A, and then A will just, and then it bypasses conference committee. And so we have a final reading. And then in each chamber, whether there, I believe whether, correct me if I'm wrong, but whether or not it goes to conference committee, right? It goes back to the floor one more time. If they're, oh, actually, let me back up. Sorry. The other way that you can bypass conference is if the originating chamber, so the first chamber, so if we're talking about House bill, that would be the House. So if the Senate makes a change, so now the bill is B, House passed A, and the Senate says, House, will you just agree to B? And if the House says, yes, I'll agree to B, then we're good. Then we don't have to go to conference. If we do go to conference, and if conference goes well and it passes out of conference, they're going to have a conference, what's called a conference draft. It could be conference draft 1 typically, and then it goes back to the floor in both chambers. They vote on it one more time. Then it goes to the governor's desk. I just went through that really fast. So stop me and ask questions if you have them. The final step of the legislative process is for it to be transmitted to the governor. And there's a few different ways it can pass. It can pass if the governor signs it into law, if the governor does nothing. So you can allow a law to pass without signature. So if he does nothing, then the law still passes. It doesn't make any sort of difference. There's not like extra, in a law that was signed versus a law that was allowed to be passed, into law without signature is not any better than the other one. Or if the governor vetoes, but the legislature can override his veto. So this is the checks and balances between the different bodies of government, right? Civics, 5th grade civics 101. But a bill dies if a governor vetoes it and the legislature does not override the governor's veto. So a lot of the times it's much harder to get the legislature to vote to override something because that takes sort of exceptional political will.
Mandy, we do have a question about conference committee in the chat from Joy. She has a question about the originating chamber and bypassing the conference committee.
Great question. I know I went through that really fast. So we go back to our House bill, right? So House passes a bill all the way through, passes all of its House committees. It passes, all 3 readings in the House, and they have version A. And then it goes to the Senate. So version A crosses over to the Senate. Senate hears it in all the Senate committees, passes all 3 Senate readings, but now it's been amended in Senate committee. Now it looks like version B. The difference could be a date, and the difference the difference could be more substantial, but the Senate will send it back over to the House and ask the House to agree to version B, because the House is the House's bill, right? So the originating chamber needs to say, we agree with your changes or we disagree with your changes. If they disagree with the changes, it'll go to conference committee. If they agree to the changes, then it doesn't have to go to conference committee, and it's beautiful. Another way that can happen is if the Senate just say that the House passes out what advocates call a clean draft. So it means it has a clean date, it has language that we all like. This doesn't happen that often, but say, and that by a clean date, I mean a date that's effective upon approval or in the near future, as opposed to a defective date where it's 50 years in the future, which they often do as a tactic to make sure that the Senate can't just, or the other chamber can't just pass it out. But so say it is a clean bill, the Senate passes out the exact same language, doesn't make any changes, then we also bypass conference committee.
Did that answer your question, Joy?
Awesome. And Janelle, I see another question. How long does it take for the governor to not make a vote before it passes? I believe well, it depends on when the legislature passes it out. If they pass it out if they pass it out early enough in session, the governor has something like 10 days to sign a bill, allow the bill, or to sign a bill, to veto the bill, or it becomes law without signature. I believe 10 days, but if it passes out after a certain point in session, then I believe it's what, 45 days, Sandy?
35?
I said 40. I thought 45, but
35 days after sine die.
Yeah.
35, 45, something like that. Sorry.
We have, Public Access Room and the Legislative Reference Bureau, they always have a sheet of the dates to know, because sometimes it's calendar days, sometimes it's not calendar, certain days don't count. And as an example of that, the legislature has to meet can meet for up to 60 session days per the state constitution. And so when they set out to meet for 60 session days, that does not mean 2 calendar months. The legislative session, which I should have started with, per the Constitution, starts on the 3rd Wednesday of January. And it runs up to 60 session days. But that will include a number of recess days that will not include a number of recess days. And so what it actually looks like is the middle of January until early May, typically late April, early May. And so that doesn't look like 60 days. It looks like much more than 60 days. So it can be kind of confusing, but those dates are going to be the legislative calendar and the dates by which governor needs to sign or veto or allow to become law without signature. Those will all be posted on the Capitol website as well as Legislative Reference Bureau. So just to give you a brief overview of, not to scare you, but to give you a realistic expectation of what the bill passage rate looks like. In 2021, there were 2,800 bills introduced, 265 bills passed. So the passage rate is 9.4%. And this is when I make a joke about how I think of my bills like baby sea turtles and that most of them don't make it. But I've been told that joke is too morbid, so I won't.
There was a question, Mandy, there was a question from Courtney. The range of time minimum maximum has taken to go from bill introduction to bill becomes a law in the state of Hawaii. I don't know if this current slide answers that question, Courtney. Because our legislative session is usually the 3rd Wednesday of January, and it goes for 60 session days. And so it ends like the 1st week of May. And then this is the bill passage rate.
So, but the actual time would be between, let me read Courtney's question. It could actually be, listen, if you pass it early enough in session, you can have a law by what? Mid-April. So you introduce in January, it's law by April, or even earlier than that, right? So you could theoretically, because deadlines set the cap of like how long you can take to get it through the legislative process. But if you only have a single referral and your bill is heard right away, it can cross over sooner. Bills can be early for their deadlines. It doesn't have to, not everything happens on the deadline. So if you could theoretically pass a bill very early into session, and then the governor would have an expedited timeline to sign or allowed to pass and allow out signature or veto, and then you could have a law very early on in session. So you could theoretically have a law, in like February or March.
And I put some information in there about how many days a governor has to veto or allow the bill to become law without a signature. And when the governor has to notify the legislature about his intent to veto, that's where I got the 35 days from, because that's what we really care about. If the governor is going to veto a bill, that really triggers our alarm, because then, you know, that's when we have to worry about if there's going to be a special session, or if our bill that we care about is going to be vetoed, and what we're going to do about that. So that's our 35-day alarm trigger.
Yeah, definitely. So the intent to veto list, the governor, like Sandy just said, so 35 days after sign die, which is the last day of session, the governor has to give his intent to veto list. It's any bill that he is considering for a veto. He does not have to veto any of the bills on that list, but he cannot veto any bill that is not on that list, which is great. So you might know right away that, you know, as soon as you see that list, that your bill is safe. To finish answering Courtney's question though, depending on when the bill or when the law goes into effect, if it's effective upon approval, typically a bill would be passed, then could be considered passed and go into, would become law in like July. Typically it would be July. So, and that's because that's kind of the timeline of when the legislature will pass something, then the governor has his period of time to review the legislation, and then he decides whether or not he's going to veto it. And then on that final day of the veto deadline, you'll know beforehand, but then the laws that are not vetoed and not signed will just pass into law without signature. But if it's signed, then it goes into effect earlier.
There's also a question from Rafia. Can you provide example of bill passed?
Tell them about your AVR bill.
Tell them about my AVR bill. So Common Cause Hawaii and a bunch of coalition partners finally passed in the 2021 legislative session. So 2021 was from January through the end of April, because we had a shortened legislative session due to COVID. And we have been trying to pass automatic voter registration for about 8 years. And so you see on the slide in front of you that only under 10% of bills get passed every year. And so we have been trying to pass automatic voter registration for about 8 years. And it takes a long time for a bill to pass. And so we finally passed automatic voter registration this session. We had a bill introduced, like Mandy said, it was a bill in the House, a bill in the Senate, and both were moving. The House bill died. The Senate bill lived. It crossed over from Senate to House, but it made changes. And so the House side did not match the Senate side at the very end. So we went to conference. And when we went to conference, in the 2021 session, no one was allowed to go in person to the Capitol. So we had to watch online them talking across the table about how they didn't like each other's changes. And they kept on going back and forth, and they, met in across the table from each other and immediately recessed. And so we did not know what negotiations they were carrying on behind the scenes, even though according to their own rules, the negotiations were supposed to be public. So on the very last day, conference was only a week long. This 2021 session conference was only a week long. I think on Thursday, they finally reached an agreement as to the AVR bill. And we were sweating it out. I was texting all the legislators on their phones, please pass this. What more information do you need? What compromise language do you need? We're happy to supply it, because we're so close. We were flooding their offices with phone calls from their community members, from people in their districts supporting AVR. And so finally they reached an agreement, and we got it passed. And then of course we were sweating it on the floor vote, because each side has to go through a floor vote, the final reading of the floor for conference draft 1. And at that time we were, calling supporters in the House and in the Senate to say, please make sure the AVR passed. Please vote in favor of AVR on the House floor vote and on the Senate floor vote. And finally that passed. And then we were sweating out the 35 days to see if governor was going to put this on his veto list. So we were calling the governor's office to say, please don't veto AVR. This is a great bill. And then he did not veto it. So that was really great. And then of course, the very last step is asking for a signature ceremony, to have a bill signing ceremony, which he did not do, but that's fine. At least he signed it into law. So those were all the steps that we go through, and every single step of the way is making sure people turn out to submit written testimony, to testify via Zoom, and make sure that the bill moves every step of the way. And conference was just, like sweat pouring down my face. But anyway, so it does take a long time for a bill to pass. It does take a very long time.
Yeah, I have seen bills pass in their first session though, and it really has to do with political will and public support. But I mean, I've seen bills with lots of political will behind them that didn't make it. I've seen bills with lots of public support behind them that didn't make it. But I've also seen bills that seemingly had neither and still passed. So, there are a lot of factors that can come into play. I saw somebody in the chat had asked about like what makes, for a successful bill, or how to be successful in trying to pass a bill. And there are a lot of different ways. One of our next sessions is going to be about effective storytelling and using your story to be a powerful advocate. And so they'll touch a little bit more about that. But I find really effective advocacy in people who are passionate and people who speak to their experience, and when people are able to adopt different roles in their advocacy. I think my whole thing is that I think everybody has a role to play in advocacy, and Hi-Fi has a specific role, Common Cause has a specific role, and everybody has a role. Everybody can have a role. Okay, we are a little short on time. We're almost at the halfway mark. So I'm going to go through some of the website stuff a little bit quickly. We are very lucky that our state legislature actually has I think the Capitol website is actually pretty good. I'm going to say it. I really like it. You can find out a lot of information, and you take for granted that, we can look up things like legislative history and see every piece of testimony that was submitted on a bill. That's not true of every state legislature. It's not so easy to track things. We also have a bill tracker. But the first thing you want to do, and this is again, something that I think a lot of people are afraid to ask, but never be afraid to ask, is to find your state representative and senator. And you might not know who it is. That's okay. No time like the present. And there's a really easy tool to do that. So you go to the legislature's website, which is capital.hawaii.gov. So that's capital CAPITOL.hawaii.gov. And you can go to find your legislator link on the top right of the screen, and that will take you to a page to type in your address. And then you'll get the contact information for both your state House of Representatives and your senator. In order to, this was not always the case, but during the COVID-19 pandemic, they started using a virtual testimony. So instead of going to the Capitol to testify in person, you would testify over Zoom. This has really opened it up so you don't have to be in Honolulu, which excludes the rest of the state to testify at a hearing. So that part has been really great. But where it has created some access issues is that people used to be able to fax or email testimony to committees. And now you do have to do it through the website, but it's actually very easy to register. You go onto the register, the register link at the top right of the homepage, and then you just fill in an email address and your information. And that will allow you to have things like a bill tracker as well. So it's actually, like I said, I think we have a pretty good Capitol website. You can search for and track bills on the legislature's website, which is really convenient. You can do it for, if you know the bill number, you can type in bill number, no spaces. So if it's HB2, you just type in HB2 on that bill status measure status, that first one on the top on the left-hand side. But you can also do a keyword search. So if you're like, I want to know about every bill relating to cannabis that was introduced this year, you can do that. One of the other ways, one of the other really great parts of the Capitol website is under reports and lists. So you can actually look up, say you find out who your representative is and you're like, I want to know what they're interested in. One way to do that is go to reports and lists, and you can actually segment it out. So you look up your legislator and find out which bills they were the first primary introducer on. And that's going to tell you a lot about what they care about. You can also sign up for hearing notices. It's really, I'm assuming a lot of you don't do this full time for a job. And so you need a way to really conveniently know, you just like, tell me when I need to show up, tell me when I need to submit testimony, and you can do that. So the legislature has to give they typically give 48 hours notice before a hearing. So it is, but testimony is due 24 hours before the hearing. Sometimes they will accept late testimony, sometimes they will not. That can be really difficult. I know it's a short turnaround. We struggle with this all the time. One way to make sure that you don't miss anything is to sign up for hearing notifications. And you can do that by measure. So you can sign up for, I want to know when HB2 is up for a hearing, or you can do it by committee. So if you're like, I just want to know about all the upcoming agriculture bills. So you can sign up for all of the agriculture committee notices in the House and the Senate.
Mandy, we have a question from Janelle in the chat. She asked, once a bill becomes law, how do you follow up to make sure it's being enacted? What can be done if it's not?
Ooh. Well, a lot of things. So you should, if a bill, I guess it just depends on what agents, like what enacted mean, or like what enforced means, or how it's being administered. If it's not being followed, a lot of the times you can sue, or you can call attention to the fact that it's not being followed. If there's not a cause of action there, then you can go to the executive branch. You can go to your legislator. There are a lot of, it's just really going to be highly dependent on your avenues for trying to aid in making sure it's being enforced or enacted or administered, are highly dependent on what the actual bill is and whether there is like a cause of action, or so if you pass like a non-discrimination law and there's already a cause of action, there's a private cause of action in there, then you can, that is a path of recourse for anybody who is still experiencing discrimination that is now illegal under this new law, as an example. But if it's a law where it just requires an agency to do something, that can be a little bit harder, because we have passed laws in the past and and certain agencies haven't done anything about them. An example of this is the Public Safety Department was supposed to be administering identification documents to people who are exiting jails and prisons. This was passed in 2017, and they still aren't in full compliance. And so they that has been a real struggle in getting them to comply. So that's an example that's definitely something to watch out for. And it does depend on what the actual law is, but yeah, that can be really frustrating when you do so much work and then the agencies in charge just don't do it.
So yeah, I agree with what Mandy just said, Janelle. We, like I said, just passed automatic voter registration in 2021, and it was effective immediately upon signing. And we have been trying to work with the Office of Elections and the county clerks and the State Department of Transportation, DMV clerks, to make sure implementation of AVR goes smoothly for the end user, which is us, the public. And it's been kind of difficult. Government doesn't really like the public, poking around for some reason in its affairs to make sure that implementation goes well. And I think the next part of what Mandy will be going into about boards and commissions is really important because there are a lot of boards and commissions that oversee government agencies that's where we could have a hand in. Like, here's this new law that was passed and is effective now. What is your agency that this commission oversees? How can you actually make sure this agency is implementing AVR or whatever other law that is in effect? How can you oversee this implementation effectively? And another thing is that the legislature doesn't like to feel like its laws are not being implemented. And you can talk to your legislator about informational briefings. That's another way to see how laws are being enacted upon properly.
We have another question in the chat, which is it helpful to write repercussions in the bill if it's not enforced? Yeah, I think there's one very obvious way is it really depends on the nature of the bill, is to allow for like a private cause of action, but the legislature doesn't necessarily love that. It does get the agencies out of enforcement though, if it's the only form of recourse if something's not being followed. But there can also be penalties. There can be, it just depends on what it is. But like Sandy said, if the executive branch can just sort of not do something, but the legislature, if they typically wouldn't write repercussions on the agency into the bill, but they would try to incentivize compliance in other ways, maybe in the following legislative session. But these are really good questions. This session, like I said, there was remote testimony. You do have to create an account to testify remotely. You have to submit your testimony through the Capitol website. And then after you submit your testimony, and these slides are they're very instructive. And so if you need to go back, and I think we will be sending out the slides, or we'll be sending out the recording. So if you need to go back and look at these, you'll be able to do so. But once you submit testimony on a measure, if you look at this green box, it says, Zoom requested. You can indicate as you're submitting testimony that you want to testify remotely as well. So you can testify through writing, and you can testify remotely at the hearing. And then a certain amount of time so 3 hours before the hearing begins, you'll have it'll pop up on your account the option to join the Zoom meeting. Okay, so you can join the meeting. You should join the meeting early, the Zoom meeting early, and that's the hearing, just to make sure that you get access. They ask you to join 30 minutes early. I never do that, but you should. So do as I say, not as I do. But I've also never been locked out of a Zoom meeting, but I would advise you to follow instructions exactly. Unlike me, don't be like me. Join early and be prepared. So during the Zoom hearing, they will ask you right before it's your turn to testify, they'll ask you to turn on your camera. So I would turn off my camera as soon as I joined, but then when it's your turn to testify, you can turn your camera on. You don't have to have your camera on though, but you do have to be unmuted so people can hear you. Just to let you know though, all of your testimony, something that I want to make sure is very clear, all of your testimony is public record. Your verbal testimony is public record too. So people have the right to watch the hearings back if they have been recorded. or to tune in. So you should just keep that in mind. I would not include anything on public record that you wouldn't want lots of people to find out. So whether that's your personal story or things like including your personal cell phone number in your testimony, I would not do that. Sorry, I'm also gonna, so next I'll be talking about county level advocacy. So remember when we talked about who we should go to about different problems? It's usually when I see people, when I see advocates kind of slip up on who has the authority to enact the change that they're looking for, a lot of the times it's going to be between the county and the state. And so they'll go to their state legislature and legislators and they'll be like, I want you to fix all of the potholes, or I want to do all these zoning regulations. And the state legislator is going to look at you and be like, I mean, I can call somebody, but really like this is a county issue. Yeah. But the county, so it's important to know the county legislative process. I will say, I think the county legislators, the county council members, sitting county council members are typically very accessible to their constituents. So you can get to know them very well. They meet on a year-round basis. Their process is very similar to the state legislative process. Counties are going to vary regarding hearing schedules and whatnot, but they're also broken up into subject matter committees, so you can get to know the different chairs of those subject matter committees that are going to be reviewing the bills that you're most interested in. Unfortunately, there's not an easy way to really track bills across the county websites. You're going to have to do that manually, but also there are lots of organizations like Hi-Fi, like Common Cause. Find a local organization that does advocacy in the area that you're most interested in, and they can probably help you track. And if you don't know who to turn to, just write to me and I will help you find somebody, I promise. So the county councils get their authority from the county charter, which is once again, the constitution that governs the counties. And the county council meetings, like the state legislative meetings, the state legislature meetings, are going to be open to the public. And that's with the exception of they go into executive session sometimes. They approve county budgets, pass resolutions, and local laws called ordinances. A quick overview of just a few of the points of how federal and state and county jurisdiction vary. So again, if you want to regulate immigration, do immigration reform, you're not going to go to your county council member. You're not going to go to, I mean, you could, and you could pass a resolution and that would be fine. But if you want to pass something that carries the force of law, you're going to go to your congressional delegation because immigration is the jurisdiction of the federal government, as is national security, military, air transportation, which of course came up during COVID. In the state, we have a centralized education system. We have a centralized jail and prison system. We don't have county jails here. We don't have the school district. There's not local school districts like we see on the mainland. We have centralized systems, and also the judiciary. Judiciary is under the purview of the state and not the counties. The counties are going to look at things like zoning, county beaches and parks, public transit, county police departments, though a lot of these things can be regulated at the state level as well. But remember the hierarchy of laws. So the county cannot regulate the state, but the state can typically regulate the county, right? So the state can say what can pass laws that affect the county. This isn't just universal. This isn't like a blanket statement, but typically if you want, you can pass police reform at the state level is what I'm saying, but you can't really pass criminal legal reform at the county level. You're not going to be able to revise the penal code at the county level, but you can pass like police transparency laws or police reform at the state level. But if you want potholes, you're going to go to the county. Fees for county services, you're going to go to the county. So going through the county councils really quickly, we have the Hawaii County Council. We have 9 members representing different districts, 2-year terms. Full council typically meets twice a month on Wednesdays with committees in between. Here's the county website. So the counties are really going to vary in their rules and their procedures, but a lot of it is going to look the same. So you can get to know the different quirks of the county councils, but a lot of it is going to be very similar. So Maui County, 9 members, again, 1 from each residency area. They meet, twice a month. And then, and you can, again, all of these the committee meeting, the council meetings and the committee meetings are open to the public. One way that the councils and the legislature differ is that, unlike at the state legislature, very often you can testify at the full county council meetings. I'm trying to think of a county where that's not true, but I think that's true across the board. So if you miss the committee hearing, but you want to weigh in on something, you can do so at their full council meeting. So if you want to talk to all of them, I've testified at full council meetings. Honolulu City Council. Oh, sorry, Sandy.
Oh yeah, you're correct. Testify before the entire county council at every county.
Yep. So, and then with like the state legislature, you're going to have officers at the county council, city and county councils as well. So you're going to have a chair, vice chair. City for the Honolulu City Council, 9 members again. They meet at least once a month. Committee meetings, they serve 4-year, these ones serve 4-year terms. The Honolulu City Council website is perhaps more user-friendly than I think the other counties. Sandy, let me know if you disagree, but I think in terms of finding bills and looking up bills and resolutions, I find it a little bit more user-friendly. This is the Kauai County Council. Oh, sorry. They have 7 members and they're elected on an at-large basis, which means everybody votes for all of the members. They serve 2-year terms. I know I went through the county council very quickly. Sandy, did you have anything to add?
No, that was great. I want to give people a chance because we covered so much to ask any questions about the materials we covered.
I know I went through that really quickly, trying to get through everything. I know we packed a lot into this presentation, so if you need us to go back or revisit anything, please chime in. This can be a discussion.
Yes.
All right, well, with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to pass it back over to Sandy.
Hi, everyone. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, it's about Sunshine Law 101, counties, boards, and commissions. So we're going to be talking about how to participate before counties, boards, and commissions, which Mandy just covered. And so a crucial difference between the state legislature and the state legislative process and counties and county boards and state boards and county and state boards and commissions is the Sunshine Law. The state legislature does not have to follow the Sunshine Law, and county councils, city council, boards and commissions all have to follow the Sunshine Law. And so that is a big difference. And so that's why you could testify before the entire county council, boards and commissions. So this is just a really quick primer on the Sunshine Law. So the Sunshine Law, it's our open meetings law, and it governs the manner in which everyone testifies before and how the county councils and boards and commissions must conduct their official business. So like I said, it does not apply to the state legislature. That's why the state legislature could issue its notice of hearing 48 hours before a hearing, but everyone else must file its notice of a hearing, its agenda for a hearing 6 calendar days. So for county councils, 6 calendar days before an agenda, it has to file its meeting notice. That goes for any board and commission. So for state boards and commissions, it goes up on this website. For county boards and commissions, it goes up on the county calendar website. If a board and commission has its own website, it also should post a notice of the agenda 6 calendar days on the board and commission website. So for people who are interested in particular commission or board, please check the board and commission website. They should put up notices of the agenda. If it's a routine meeting, they should try to set forth at the beginning of the year. We'll have meetings quarterly, the first Monday of each month or something like that. According to the Sunshine Law, the agenda must describe with reasonable specificity all matters to be considered so that the public should know whether to attend the meeting or not. So for example, the State Ethics Commission can't just say we're going to have a meeting to talk about ethics. It needs to say we're going to have a meeting to talk about ethics dealing with whether or not to change the lobbying rules to make it more difficult for lobbyists to register or to increase fees or fines. So people should know if they want to attend this meeting or not. The agenda should also contain the board's electronic and postal contact information, so you could submit testimony if you cannot attend in person or remotely. One thing that's been tripping up a lot of people is that people don't know that they could request a copy of the board packet. So boards and commissions receive information about the materials that they're going to be acting on or reviewing. And so the public could get a copy of the board packet also. So feel free to ask the board or commission for a copy of the board materials. They should be made available at the same time to the public as it is to the board and commission itself. So request that board packet. It's very helpful for you to know what the board is going to be looking at when you attend these board materials, board meetings. There are a lot of boards and commissions at the state level and at the county level. And a lot of these boards and commissions are constantly looking for the public to participate and sit on these boards and commissions. So I highly encourage people to submit your name to be involved in government in that manner. It's not just testifying, it's also being able to actually become a policy maker when you're on these boards and commissions. So please take a look at what board openings there are and, be a board member. So an example of a really important commission that is currently active right now is the State Reapportionment Commission. And it's only active for a very short period of time. And it's to deal with reapportionment and redistricting for 2021. And it's redrawing the political boundaries for Hawaii. 2022 is going to be a huge political year in the state. All 76 Hawaii state legislators are up for election. So all of our entire state House of Representatives and senators are going to be up for election. As you probably heard already, our governor seat is open, our lieutenant governor seat is open. So it's going to be a huge number of people up for election in Hawaii. And so, and why are we doing reapportionment now? This only happens once every 10 years. It happens after the census. I'm sure you've heard about the census last year in 2020 when everyone was asked to fill out the census form. And so, so that's what reapportionment is. Reapportionment is dividing up the 435 House seats in the US House of Representatives. And so first you divide up the House seat based on the population that Hawaii was allocated in the census. And then redistricting is dividing up the state representatives and drawing the lines in the state representatives. And so why is redistricting so important? Redistricting affects political power in the state. And it affects political power because, we vote and elect representatives, but it's hard to vote to get someone elected if the lines are drawn so that you cannot have your community in a way that you can have your community elect someone that represents your community. So that is why redistricting is so important. And I want to be sure that people understand what I'm saying. Redistricting draws the lines for where your community could elect someone to represent you in the state House of Representatives and in the state Senate. So that is why redistricting is so important. And so redistricting gives you the opportunity to choose who you represent in government. Redistricting is not to like cement who is already in office to make sure they could be returned to office. It's not to make sure that the political powers stay the same. It's really for the people. It's to make sure that the people get to elect who is best for them. It's to draw lines to best represent the people and the communities of interest. And it's based off of census data. So every 10 years, we have a recount of everyone who lives in this country, and populations change and where we live change. And that's why we need to redraw our political boundaries. And so how is this redrawing of the political boundaries done in Hawaii? We have a state reapportionment commission, and they have to follow the Sunshine Law, and it's done every 10 years after the census, and this is set forth in our state constitution. So this all goes together with political advocacy, and it all flows from what Mandy was talking about, the state constitution, and boards and commissions, and the Sunshine Law just kind of flows all together. And so who is on this commission? So the state constitution actually set forth who is on this commission. 2 members are selected by the state Senate, 2 members by the House, 2 members by the Senate, who is chosen by his peers from the opposite party, which is like the Republican Party. So 2 members from the House Republican Party, and then these 8 people select 1 person, and that is, the chair now is Mark Mugaishi. So we have this 9-member reapportionment commission, and they get together and they're redrawing our political lines. So we're in this process of this reapportionment of our political lines to elect our 76 state House of Representatives and Senators for the next 10 years. Hawaii is so unique in that our Hawaii Constitution says that only permanent residents are included for this redistricting process. We don't count everyone who lives here. We only count permanent residents. So we don't count military and college students who do not declare Hawaii as their permanent resident state. They declare another state as their permanent resident. And that affects how many people get counted for reapportionment and redistricting. And so according to the census, we've been hearing a lot over the past several years about how Hawaii has lost population and how there's a brain drain and how people have moved to the mainland. But what we've seen is that we've actually gained population in Hawaii in all counties, really. We have a total of 1,455,271 in the state. And you can see that this is a gain really across the state, except for in Kalapapa, where we actually lost people. So we've gained people everywhere in the state, which is actually quite surprising. I was surprised to see that we actually gained so many people, nearly 100,000. And so when we were looking at the numbers for redistricting and the reapportionment commission, we were trying to see how many military people who declared another state as their permanent resident will not be counted. And this is so important because if we don't count them for redistricting, another island could actually gain a House seat or a Senate seat, and that will shift the balance of power in our state legislature. And so when we looked at this, we were seeing that when we extract out military and students, we saw that Oahu would lose over 70,000 total population members from this census count. So that's kind of large. During the last redistricting, the Big Island gained 1 Senate seat with the redistricting. So there's actually a lot of political implications from the census and from redistricting. And so it really does take a lot of political, it affects a lot of political power in the state, and it does, people should become very aware of this process and what it means. But with the redistricting, what we saw here, even with the extraction of the numbers, that it did not change how many Senate and House seats each island would have. It would still remain the same. So Oahu will still keep 17 Senate and 35 House seats. Hawaii Island will still keep 4 Senate and 7 House seats. Maui will still keep 3 Senate and 6 House seats, and Kauai will still keep 1 Senate and 3 House seats. So will remain the same with the current census numbers and after extracting non-permanent resident military as students. There is currently some debate going on if we are extracting enough non-military non-permanent residents from Oahu's count. So there is still some debate going on. If that does change, if that number changes and we need to extract more, if the reapportionment commission needs to extract more, Hawaii may see a gain in a House seat and Oahu may see a loss in a House seat. That's not certain yet, and that's being debated within the reapportionment commission now. And so, and then you could see how that could affect political representation in the state legislature. And so when you draw the lines, there are certain rules that must be followed in the Hawaii state constitution. The districts must be compact. They can't be spread out everywhere. They must follow easily recognizable features such as streams, streets, the ahupua'a. They should follow ahupua'a. And so there are rules. They must be contiguous. But that's only as practicable. And so if it's not possible to follow these boundaries, these requirements set forth in the Hawaii state constitution, then the lines could be drawn not strictly adhering to these Hawaii state constitution rules. So I just want to show you this community that's been proposed by the Reapportionment Commission. This is proposed House District 51. This is Lanikai, Waimanalo, and Portlock. This is the proposed House District 51. And for those of you who are on Oahu who know Lanikai, Waimanalo, and Portlock, these are very different and distinct communities. And they have now been combined into one proposed House District 51. And this is the classic gerrymandering map, which is, you can see, kind of curved around. And this is our proposed House District 51. I'm not saying this was a purposefully gerrymandered proposed House District 51, but this kind of does look a little odd, I would say. These are very different and distinct communities that have been combined together to form one proposed House District 51. Don't know if anyone would have any concerns with how Waimanalo would be able to make its voice heard or elect a representative when faced with Lani Kai and Portlock being able to exercise its voice. So this is the current House District 51, this area right here. You can see how different it is. This is the current House District 51. And this is the new House District 51 that's being proposed. People in Waimanalo are not happy with this new proposed House District 51 as compared to this current House District 51 that they are in. And so these are the changes in the maps that are being proposed right now, and they will impact how communities are able to elect representatives that are best able to serve them in the House and in the Senate. If you see other proposed redistricting maps that impact your community, that impact how you are able to elect representatives that best serve you, that best represent your community, it's time to speak out, because this reapportionment commission is going on right now. They're having public hearings right now, and it will end, this reapportionment commission will end in January, because that's when this process will be finished. And so we want to make sure that people understand how important it is, because once these maps are done and finalized, this is how you will be able to elect your representatives, and this is the only way you'll be able to elect your representatives for the next 10 years in the House and in the Senate. And so, yes, you can have the link in the chat. And so how do you participate in this process? There is a hearing, public hearing going on today at 2 o'clock to talk about it. And you could talk about greater transparency and public participation, just that you need to know more that this is going on. And for people who live in Waimanalo or in Lani Kai, maybe Lani Kai, you don't want to be included with Waimanalo. Maybe Portlock, you don't want to be included with Lani Kai and Waimanalo. I don't know. I don't live in those areas, but you are best able to represent your community. And what you should say is, talk about your community, what your community's concerns are, what attention you need from government to best represent your community. And if these maps that you see, if they don't represent your community, and if you won't be able to get the services from government because of these maps, then you need to speak out. Because these maps, if they go into place, will impact you for the next 10 years. And we've been telling people that. And so here's the public hearing. Like I said, there is a public hearing today for East Oahu, East Honolulu. And so it is highly important. That's really all I have to say about reapportionment. It affects everyone in this state who cares about their community, who wants to have a voice in government, and to make sure that their community is properly represented. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sandy. We're so lucky to have you here with your expertise on this. I feel like the reapportionment process is something that most people don't know very much about. It's not the most, it hasn't necessarily been the most accessible thing to a lot of folks, and what its implications are for their communities. So we're really lucky to have you here today. Courtney had asked, can we have the, oh, and you just sent, so Sandy just posted in the chat the links to the maps and information about reapportionment. Do we have any questions? So we have about 23 minutes left. We can end early, but we also have time for questions or discussion if anybody has any comments or questions. I will say, so we do have an evaluation for the training. We hope that you found it helpful, but we also want you to be really honest with us if there are things that we can improve upon. So I posted the link to the evaluation form earlier, and here I can post it again, as well as the registration page for the upcoming trainings. Our next session is going to be on December 11th, and how to be an effective advocate by telling your story. We believe that everyone has a story to tell. And really, a lot of times at the legislature, we can have organizations, we can have lawyers and doctors and whoever come in, but it's really people who are in the communities that are most impacted by a particular policy, that have the most compelling stories, that have the lived experiences, that can speak to the issue. You are an expert already on your own life and your own experience. And I think where a lot of people get hung up is they feel like, oh, I don't, I'm not enough of an expert to testify, or my voice doesn't mean anything, but it really does. And by stepping forward, you also inspire others to step forward. And the most compelling testimony I hear at the legislature is people who just speak to their personal experience. And again, you are an expert on your own experience and your own story. I will, let me post the evaluation form in the chat, just a second. Sandy, do you have anything to add?
No, thank you so much. If there are any questions, please let us know. Let's see. I'm going to put, if you need more information about the Sunshine Law, because that is actually a little bit complicated, I'm going to give you the Office of Information Practices website. I think there's a lot of information in the chat.
Wonderful. Thank you all for your kind words. And thank you for joining us on it. It is a very chilly Saturday morning. I have never been this cold in Hawaii before. I am free. It was like 60 degrees. What is happening? But we really appreciate you. Get our coffee together and sign in on for a 2-hour training. I feel like it takes a really special group to do that. I'm really grateful to be with you all this morning.
We do have some time left. Are there any specific bills anyone is trying to run that you have questions about? I don't want to shortchange you on your 20 minutes. Also, I've had a lot of coffee, so. Or if you don't, that's fine too. You can have your Saturday back.
Again, so we are running this training through with a group of other awesome nonprofits that include Hawaii Children's Action Network, Hawaii Alliance of Nonprofit Organizations, Hawaii Appleseed, and Blue Zones. And again, I'm from Hawaii Public Health Institute, and Sandy's with Common Cause Hawaii. So we're not doing this alone. We have a lot of really fantastic partners in the community on this, and we're grateful to be able to put this on. Please do fill out the evaluation forms. It helps us get better, and we want to make sure we're providing the best training for you possible.
Hi, this is Violet Horvath. Sorry to interrupt. I had put some information in the chat about if you're an individual with a disability, that you can free of charge request accommodations so that you can participate in meetings. And if you are someone with a disability or you are a caregiver for someone, we definitely need more people with disabilities participating in the legislative process. There are a lot of bills that directly or indirectly affect persons with disabilities, but they get shut out because they don't know about the accommodations or they're a little bit shy about taking part, but I really encourage you to do so. So thank you very much for your presentation and for the time today.
Thank you so much, Violet. That's such an important issue to raise. This came up a lot in the beginning of last session when people weren't super clear on how, well, maybe it was the 2020 session when it reconvened and there was just a question about accessibility. And then when 2021 session was announced and the virtual testimony process, it, like I said, it cut off accessibility to some folks who may not have ready internet access, or were used to submitting testimony via email rather than through the website, and the website may not be the most accessible there if they were used to faxing it. All of a sudden, these different channels were cut off. And so that actually created kind of a problem for a lot of folks who are living with disabilities, or a lot of folks in areas that don't have consistent internet access. And so that is an accessibility issue that we definitely see as a problem. There is there are instructions on how to request accommodations on the hearing notices. You can also call public access room. They are to promote public access to the legislature, so they can direct you they can send you in the right direction. You can also call, I've spoken about this issue with Speaker's office and Senate President's office, or you could call if you know who the committee clerk is. And if you have any other, honestly, I'll also hold myself out. I'm not an expert on this, but you can call me, and I promise I will help connect you to the right person if you're having trouble. I will hound them until they respond to you.
So for boards and commissions, the agenda is supposed to have a notice telling you how to be able to access if you need an accommodation, or how to request an accommodation. I know Maui County, for some reason, stopped putting that notice on when they went to remote for the pandemic, but now they've started putting that notice on their agendas again. And so even the emailed agendas are supposed to be in a font that is supposed to be easily read by people who have sight impairments. There is a question in the chat from Janelle. Do you recommend a website with instructions on how to pass a bill? Again, it's the public access room. It is really, really good. It talks about when to start meeting with legislators, and even how to approach a legislator.
A lot of local organizations also have advocacy toolkits on their websites. I feel like, I mean, Hi-Fi has some resources, HCAM has resources. I came from ACLU of Hawaii, which has a legislative advocacy toolkit on their website as well. That was created by the Smart Justice organizer, Shana. And that really walks you through tips that don't always come in writing, like how to talk to a legislator, how to get your message across. And Laura's going to talk more about that next weekend when it comes to telling your story in a way that people will listen. But yeah, there are a lot of resources. Another national resource that I really like is Boulder Advocacy. It's a little bit more geared towards nonprofit organizations that are engaging in lobbying, but I think there's some good grassroots information on there as well.
Janelle, do you have a specific bill that you're trying to look at? Because there are a lot of organizations that perhaps you may want to partner with. It's really useful to work with partners and coalitions.
Awesome. Well, does anybody have any other questions? If not, thank you so much. Thank you for joining, and thank you to our partners who helped put this together, to put this training series together. On my team, special shout out to Jalen Murakami, who is always so organized and helping us create these resources and these trainings. And thank you all for joining us this morning. Please reach out to me. I'm going to put my email in the chat. Reach out to me about anything at all. I'm Amanda Fernandes at hifi.org. So if you have any questions about anything we said or anything else, please feel free to shoot me an email, and if I can't answer them, I'll try to connect you to a person who can. And then Sandy just put her email address in the chat as well. All right, I'm looking forward to seeing all of the awesome bills that you pass this year.